Hello and welcome back to the Pirate Players Then and Out podcast. I'm your Hampton football enthusiast, TJ Jones, here in the month of February with a lot of things to recap, and no better person to recap them with than with our friend Adam Lee Spencer. How you doing today, Adam?
Hey, good everything to you, brother. Go Pirates. Happy New Year to everybody we haven't talked to yet. And yeah, a lot is happening.
A lot going on in the space as a whole, and with a new head coach putting together some things, it's a big thing. Since we've talked, I had the opportunity to interview Dr. Timothy Frazier. And that was a great conversation with him. Shout out to him and appreciate him for coming on. There's some more folks that are going to be coming on in the next month or so. But for today, let's get caught up on what's happening in the now as it relates to Hampton University football. And so I know there are several things that transpired since we've talked. We had a scenario where we finally had the staff get filled out, right? And back on January 1st, Coach Malone sent out a note being pleased with the fact that his staff was full. Although the interesting thing about the circumstance was they never, and they still haven't, really announced who those parties are. They're available on the school website, but they are playing it very low profile, which I think is just they want to underpromise and overdeliver, I suspect. Because they definitely have some folks who seem very well versed with lots of different backgrounds specifically. But uh, that we knew already who the offensive and defensive coordinator would be. We had kind of those rumors were already out there when last we talked, but the rest of the I think it's a 14-person staff has been filled out, and that doesn't include the a new strength and conditioning guy too, who's a longtime friend of uh, Coach Malone. So, anything jump out at you, or what did you think of the list as it came about, Adam?
Well, the first thing that stuck out to me was the size of the staff. We're going from 11, I believe, last year to at least 14 members of the staff. Um, that we knew that was a challenge uh, as a whole. The size of the staff, most of the schools in conference now, most schools in general uh, at this level have got at least 13, 14 staff members as far as coaches are going. So obviously it was good to see the number get upgraded. Secondly, I think there's relationships already in place amongst the coaching staff, which considering the challenges of last season is a plus for all involved. You know, it's Coach Bustle has stuck around. It's going to be interesting to see if anyone else gets added to the staff with a few more local ties. But the Texas recruiting pipeline should be open for the school now.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it. The Texas recruiting line is real. And I've posted the names for folks to see as to who has actually joined the staff. As I said, we had already known about Coach Bolden and Coach Jennings as far as their roles as coordinators, but we did not know that they would also be doing some position coaching as well. Coach Bolden actually coaching quarterbacks, I think is an interesting thing to see. And then Coach Jennings actually coaching safeties, which we knew he had a defensive background. And so, I called it previously. I said, we have quite an interesting group of individuals that are going to be involved with the secondary, whether it be Van Malone and his deep history in that space. But in addition to that, Coach Jennings and Coach Whitaker, I'm very interested to see how our defensive backfield progresses, especially as they're kind of going to be relatively all new, or at least it feels like they're going to be all new with some of the transitions. The other things that jump out at me is we have now a general manager, which is something that we've said, might be coming about or necessary in the modern day, in the transitions. So, Aaron McGinty coming to do that. Interesting background, lots of managerial roles in different spaces. So I think that's a nice get. And then, you talked about local ties. Quentin Lee, right, who, if I'm not mistaken, played for the university or has some local ties to the university and to the space, is someone who gives us some of that. And probably the biggest one, although they're all very solid, would be the decision for Connor Looper, right, coming with DJ Bolden to support the receivers, having been the tight ends coach at um, South Carolina State is a nice addition. They should be on the same page as it relates to the passing game. And so those are the things that I'm most excited about as it relates to this unit. And we know that it seemed like there was a later addition, which came, I think, this week, right? Which was our special teams and tight ends guy, Dwayne Lucky, as well. So a good group overall, lots of experience. And but the modus operandi, the driving focus seems to be on development, 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 which brings us to our next conversation, which I think plays out significantly when we start talking about the signings and the folks that they've added to the roster for the coming year. So let's transition over to that. So what did you think of the signings related to this year? So it began with the portal signings. Like, what do you think of that? Those kind of started popping off right after the window opened. Remember, the portal window opened up on, I want to say, January 3rd, and right
Mm.
away we saw stuff happening all over the place, both for us and for individuals who were jumping in. So, what did you think of that portion?
I think you got to go with Jalen Woods as the standout of that. You know, quarterback from Southern, so HBCU ties, kid from Atlanta. Seemed to be a talented kid from everything we hear. Seemed to be a very talented kid.
Yeah, I mean, the as far as the transfer portal signing, it definitely seemed like they were targeting Jalen Woods because he was the big announcement that took place coming from Southern, looking for a change of scenery. There was one other quarterback that was signed, from a transfer perspective, and as Trayvon Taylor. So there will be some as a rebuilding of the quarterback room. We kind of knew that with Freeman entering the portal, and it seemed like Davis also jumped in the portal. I do not know if anyone else from the quarterback room jumped in, but certainly the challenge with the portal is we don't have all the information, right? We don't know who jumped in, but then, Van Malone talked about some people who just jumped in, but then maybe decided to change their mind. The spring game will perhaps tell us more. We know that's been scheduled, which is great. As far as signings, the other one from the transfer portal specifically was a tight end from Alcorn. We needed some tight end support, and 6'4", 245. And so that's Borden. He's, as I look at my big board here, probably the other big transfer portal scenario. And then the other narrative, which I thought was very important, was that they were losing guys to the portal from the secondary, right? With both defensive backs coaches moving on, that created a scenario where a lot of the young men decided to at least explore their options. And so the school has wanted to try to put some emphasis on that. And several young people from different programs at different levels have signed on and are on campus already, as well as a number of high school defensive backs coming, which should be there by June. So they definitely rebuilt the room. From what I have on my numbers, they have seven, and it could be more, but I have seven defensive backs coming between the high school and the transfer portal to the university. And that's clearly a response to the heavy number of individuals who decided to test the portal during the most recent window.
One of the things that stuck out to me, obviously, the reloading of the defensive back room, which was supposed to be a strength last year, um, is we haven't had much turnover up front on the offensive line.
Hmm.
Not as much as uh, we've seen the past seasons, because that's been a killer. The past 2 or 3 seasons is the turnover up front on really on both sides of the ball, but it's really affected us on offense. So we really haven't seen too much turnover on that side, which is which is actually a good thing as far as continuity goes. Um, One of the things we did see and we talked about is that it seems Snipes got his ability.
Well, certainly that would be great. Although I don't know that he played more than 4 games anyway. So if he had a red shirt available, he could have used it. Either
Mhm.
way, if he wants to come back, I am sure Van Malone would be happy to take him. The portal has claimed at least a one running back of significance, but we had a very deep running back room last year, and we have some pretty exciting young people coming. So the running back room is not a huge concern. I'm very interested to see what Coach Lee does with them going forward. As to your point related to offensive line, I think retaining Brad Bussell helps with that because he was the O-line guy. And so that's probably helpful in that space. And I do think there's, some opportunity of to improve, but I think that's something that comes with gelling in time. So I'm excited to see if they have more time together and pieces they end up adding. On my math, they added a couple of they added a couple of high school offensive linemen who may or may not be able to help right away. That usually is a learning curve, and that happens. So hopefully they get the opportunity to do so. But if they're ready to go, then I'm sure that the coaches will find a way to get them right in there.
Yeah. One thing I want to do is shout out Harold O'Neal real quick. He played
Mm.
today in the HBCU Legends All-Star game. We will wish him best of luck on whatever happens with his future, whether he gets a shot in the league, gets a chance in Canada, UFL. We want to wish him the best of luck.
Absolutely, absolutely. That was a great pickup, I think from Shepherd, I think is
Mm-hmm.
where he came from, and really just stepped right in and took a leadership role and seemed to really give his all last season. So yeah, absolutely. Shout out to linebacker Harold O'Neal on his
Yeah.
journey going forward.
Yeah, he gave us a lot last year in a really tough situation, a tougher situation than a lot of people know. Because I just don't think he was helped. Him or Matthews Canty, who has gone on to different things, and we want to salute him also. I just don't think they were helped last year schematically. So it was good to see him get an opportunity to shine.
Yeah, I mean, without getting too deeply into last season, ultimately we had a lot of conversation about what might have happened there. I think injuries played a huge role. We were just talking about injuries. The injuries
Hmm.
played a huge role, especially in the secondary. And then we also knew going in that the O line and D line had suffered significant losses with the transition of the coaches connected to those spaces. Much like the secondary is going through right now, the O line and D line had the same challenges, especially the D line last year, and it was difficult to backfill those spots. As I said, I'm very glad to see that Coach Malone and his staff has already focused on backfilling the secondary scenario so that that kind of thing hopefully will not happen again. And as far as the transfer portal is concerned, by the way, I personally don't think that they're done. I I think there's just some timing to it. So ultimately, we talked about how Hampton University starts early, so it's difficult to get players in and on campus, and, so forth. So I think a few spots they were focused on, and then turned their attention to the high school signing day, which was beginning in February. We'll talk about that now. And then I do think they will be revisiting this in spots, basically until summer program starts up. So I do expect more transfer portal signings as we go on into the spring and then post the spring game and on into the early parts of the summer as players are still looking for homes. The transfer portal has a lot of bodies in it and there aren't enough spots. So hopefully the university has an opportunity to grab some individuals at spots where they are needed. Now, of course, we recognize that that is some supplemental support, right? So we must, and I'm going to say this very clearly, we must temper our expectations around individuals that we would pick up in the latter portion of the spring and into the summer, as opposed to kind of expecting them to come and they're gonna carry the team. That's a very dangerous expectation on a young person who is trying to get to know a new program, new school, and everything else in a very short period of time as the season kicks off on August 29th. Then we bring it over to this February signings, which was the balance of our young people. And we knew that there was a few more high school individuals that they were going to try to put on. And was there anything particular about that jumped out at you? We know that they already had their major portion of high school signings came before that, but what about the February high school signings? Adam, anything?
Yeah, February signings, basically bringing in wide receivers.
Right,
That's another room where we've been hit at different times by the transfer portal.
right. Yeah, so
And
So what about Dugan, right? I thought that was the one that I was waiting, I was hoping, because he was pre-committed, but he didn't sign during the early signing, so I was a little nervous.
Right.
But he did sign, and the reason why, candidly, I believe last I saw online, his parents are Hamptonians, and so I thought that was great. Bring in the connection, and he seemed, he's 6'3", he's 200 pounds, and I'm expecting him to see the field this year coming. So I'm very happy. That was the one from. Well, although I'm happy with everyone who makes the decision to come and represent the institution, that was one that kind of stood out to me because he's a legacy kid.
Yes, and we've been challenged the last couple of years with legacy recruits. You look at the school website for the football team, there's an alumni student form now where you go in and get to put in your information. It seems that there's a lot of relationship building and rebuilding being done across the board when you look at the athletic department over the last couple of years. The football program, especially, there's been some opportunities with some legacy recruits, and we weren't able to get it done. Hopefully, that changes now.
Yeah, man, that was a huge one. Rounding out the rest of the ones that basically came during the that period. We know that, as you mentioned, there was another wide receiver, Matt Patchin, 6 foot, 170 pound high school kid, came, signed on signing day. In addition to that, there another the couple of corners that signed, some of those height. Remember, I said that rebuilding, or I said defensive backs, I should say, the
Hmm.
rebuilding of the secondary. Marquay, excuse me, Willis, 6 foot, 170 pounds. Caden Rice, 6'3", 175 pounds. Couple of really solid defensive backs that were added. But what seemed like the most interesting, and like I said, I'm happy with all of them, was the addition of John Williams, the offensive lineman, 6'3", 290, who I think might be a center, or he can play all three. And so I know that was one the school, they seem to be very excited about, as well as Willis Alexander the third, who is a 6'1", 275-pound defensive tackle. So those guys were the ones on signing day. Forgive me if I've missed anyone. I don't think so. But that was in addition to all the guys who we knew about already.
Hmm.
The quarterback from Virginia Beach, Joshua Hawley, the quarterback, Xavier Brooking, 6'3", 180 pounds. And interestingly enough, I don't know if you've noticed, Brookings and Dugan seem to be working out already together,
Yes.
which I thought was really cool. Part of kind of the joy of going to a school together, as you can already kind of get in it. So clearly Brookings is serious about um, kind of, competing.
Hmm.
And that's great, as far as taking on the mantle and the opportunity to come to the university and compete to get on the field. So a lot of really cool things happening amongst those scenarios. We know there are a lot of players who are in the portal or thought about being in the portal, but I think the most interesting thing, as we've talked about, was that Coach Malone was very clear about how some students who maybe jumped in the portal will still see because they have decided to come back. The only thing is we don't know. So the spring game and when the first roster is released, whenever that is, will be very telling as to who decided to hang around and see what this new version of Hampton football is going to look like.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. The spring game in itself is going to be interesting because there's been concerns and there's been a conversation in HBCU Twitter circles about the size of the roster at this point. And we understand the challenges that this staff was being brought in with Coach Malone. I think Coach Malone was December 13th, and not having completing the staff right around New Year's. School started online, I think January 6th, and that was moving day for folks on campus. And then classes for them started on, I believe it was the 8th. So it was a short period to be able to maneuver or get things done from a recruiting perspective. So it's going to be interesting to see who they were able to keep in school when the spring roster comes out and who comes back in summer or who they can bring in summer because we start August 29th against VUL. Um,
I was going to
but
put up the schedule for you. so we could just take a quick look at that. I'm gonna pop that up on the screen and see what your thoughts are about that. We had a hole, and a lot of speculation around that first hole, right? Who we were going to pick up on August 29th.
Hmm.
It ends up being Virginia University of Lynchburg, whom we have played in the past and who is playing several HBCUs, other HBCUs. I believe Norfolk State's playing them as well, and a couple other places. So it's good that they're getting supported by some of these larger institutions, whereas we are going to University of Maryland the following week, and we're going to get be on the other end of that. It's good that we're paying it forward, I think, and giving some support. Hopefully, it's a good game. It's a nice way to open up the season and get some reps and some experience before we had to go and deal with the University of Maryland. But there was definitely some speculation as to who we might put on the schedule. I know you and I had equipped that it was possible that because of Coach Malone's relationship with Coach Jackson that we might see Prairie View. I do think we will eventually see that games, but not this
I do
season.
too. It's that old refrain with the SWAC schools of them wanting us to come there, and then we got to drag, fight tooth and nail to get them to come to us. So yeah, I agree with you. I do think that game is coming sooner or later.
Absolutely. But as you walk through the rest of the schedule, uh, the university will play, like I said, Virginia Union Lynchburg, then at Maryland. I hope to be at that game. Then Bryant, probably for the very first time, is going to come to Hampton University. I live in the New England area, so I'm very familiar with Bryant as a school, not necessarily the football program, but I know that they are trying to make moves as an institution. So that may be a good matchup for us to really see where we are as an institution as a member of the CAA. So, um, and then of course we have the the Norfolk State game at Norfolk State, and so that'll be very interesting. We've beaten them 2 years in a row, and once on their campus, once on our campus this past year, and now we go back to see them on their grounds with their new head coach and all the transitions and the documentary and everything. By the way, documentary is actually pretty good. And this week they'll be talking about Hampton, and because the Hampton game is the one they're going to discuss or they're going to cover, or so last year's Hampton game. So we know the outcome of that game. We won that game, but it's going to be interesting to see kind of what was happening on their side behind the scenes.
Yeah, you look at the schedule, and obviously the Maryland game jumps off at you. Maryland this year, Georgia Tech next year, ODU in 28, and it was announced earlier this year, UVA in 29.
Yep. That was announced too during this time. Especially, it's been a very busy time for the program, all this information coming out. But yeah, the addition of FBS programs seems to be a very intentional. On that point for a moment, Adam, you know, I don't consider these just money games. I feel like the games that the university is choosing are very intentional as far as who the opponent is, the location of the game. All of that seems to be very intentional. When you look at, we draw students from the DMV, so playing Maryland makes great sense. We draw students. I'm just not talking about just athletes. I'm talking about students in general from the Atlanta area. So playing Georgia Tech makes great sense. Obviously, playing ODU is a local game, basically. And so that makes great sense. And now going to UVA, once again, playing the flagship school of the state makes great sense. So all of these games to me are not random opportunities to, for lack of a better term, collect a check. It feels very intentional as far as the audience and the visibility related to the university.
Yeah, and you move forward into the Bryant game, a conference. That's a that's kind of an early start for conference play. As as far as we're concerned, from what we've seen over the past 2 years, we've kind of gone through the HBCU schedule, not named A&T over the last few years. So to get a conference game early, that's going to be interesting. And coming off Maryland, you know, where you're gonna have some obvious concerns of, okay, do we get out of that game healthy first and foremost,
Yeah,
and then you run right back into a conference game. So that's going to be interesting. And then you go to Norfolk to face the Beholders, and they got and they got vengeance on their mind.
Well,
And
definitely.
don't be surprised to see 34,000 people in that stadium.
At Norfolk State.
Yes, do not be surprised.
Well, I was at the game on Hampton's campus. It was definitely packed and crowded and fun this year. So, the numbers could be really significant, and I certainly hope they are. It's a great show, the Battle of the Bay, as we call it. And so then when we get past that game, we get Campbell at home. Always a tough game as it relates to us. And again, another relatively early a CAA game. And then we go on to playing um, Howard up at Audi Field again. And, it's our opportunity to get back after having lost last year for the first time in quite a while.
Speaking of vengeance, it's just to speak. Jesus Christ. The last time we had lost to Howard, Barack Obama was the president. Michelle, the kids, and Grandma Robinson were in the White House.
Well, I think one of the challenges is that that game is not a true home and home because it's played in DC, but at Audi Field. I'm assuming because of the capacity. But
Hmm.
I always wonder what it would be like to have Howard come to campus, and if that would be a very different environment for related to students, specifically a student level of excitement for the game. We'll have to wait and see. And then we get Sacred Heart at Sacred Heart. That's in my stomping ground of my way, so I should be at that game. And Sacred Heart is another program that's on the up and coming space, kind of like Bryant. And so, uh, Hampton will need to be very aware of the strengths, which I'm sure they will be by that point. So then we draw the powerhouse again, Monmouth at homecoming for, if I'm not mistaken, 2 years in a row.
Well, it's been a conference game for homecoming.
But specifically, I'm pretty sure we played Monmouth for homecoming last year too. So 2 years in a row against Monmouth. Although
Home
we played well, we played well enough to be in the game. Monmouth is a tough program and a tough draw for a homecoming game. So Hampton's definitely not taking the easy road with that. And then we move through conference play, at Towson, at Elon, and then we get another get back opportunity with A&T coming to Hampton on the 15th of November.
that the scheduling and the timing of that game is interesting. You look at, you know, the two HBCUs in the conference, so there's obviously a natural connection with it, within everything that comes with the game. And then you look at how the game ended last year, and then everything that spilled over afterwards. Them moving that game closer to the last game of the season is very, very interesting.
Well, last year's game was really, I'll just say it this way, it was heartbreaking because of the way it ended. So I certainly hope that we have a better overall experience and outcome for players and for the fans in November. And then before making the playoffs, the team will close out the season on November 1st against Stony Brook. And again, up here in the Northeast. Stony Brook's program has been, I think, a little bit ahead of ours with their development, but definitely a winnable game. So as I look at our schedule, I don't see, too many games that I just feel like we won't be in. But we have no idea how long it's going to take these players to gel or the coaching staff to develop some of the younger guys. And let's just face it, even with last year's players coming back in large number, we still have a very young team between these 2 years of players, last year's recruits and, transfers and this year's, a very young team, which is great for development. It's just a question of whether or not in the short term that creates winnable opportunities. That I don't want to put that undue pressure on young people who are trying to figure out a multitude of things in the student athlete space.
Yeah, this isn't the murderer's row that the CAA schedule can give you that we've seen in years past. There's a lot of games that can get us over the hump as far as our standing in the conference. You look at Campbell, we've been close a few times against them and just can't get over the hump. We beat Elon once, but haven't been consistent against them. Sacred Heart and Bryant are going to be interesting games because those two programs aren't that much different from where we have been within the conference. There's very winnable games. I think it's going to be interesting, especially with the new coaching staff, to see, are we seeing the adjustments
Hmm.
within the game plan from game to game? Are we seeing growth from the players from game to game?
Yeah, I agree completely. I think for me, these young people have chosen to come to the university to be developed. It's the clear mantra that Coach Malone and his staff are laying out. And so to see them improve from week to week, making good choices, being, intelligent players on the field, obviously playing tough, but playing smart, seem to be the types of things that Coach Malone is trying to foster. And so I am excited about that because we don't want to beat ourselves. You can get outmatched, perhaps out schemed and so forth, but we don't want to have scenarios come out that you could say, well, we could have won that game, but we beat ourselves. That's some of the hardest things to swallow. And there were several scenarios last year, unfortunately, where it felt like we were beating ourselves. And so I'm very optimistic that anybody who, plays us would consider us a tough out going forward. And, you know, like I said, I do think there's going to be some more pieces added, but I think the pieces that we have are committed to being developed. And who knows who decides to participate in this experience that will be called Hampton Football 2026 and beyond. And that brings me to the spring game, right? Which will give an opportunity for the players to kind of see where they're at and see how they're doing. We don't have the after spring game, spring transfer portal scenario to worry about. That is not a thing anymore. So how that plays out could be very interesting as well, but that is not a thing. So only one transfer portal that's already behind us as far as people getting into the portal. People can be signed out of it, but no new bodies getting into it, which has been a challenge for all of uh, college football the last year or so. Any thoughts on the spring game, Adam?
Well, it was a relief to see that they're going to have one first and foremost, because the roster concerns were there, I think, from a lot of people. And as I said earlier, we heard the noise in Twitter sphere about, size of the roster, some of the things that we were able to do or weren't able to do on signing day without, a lot of that was without the nuance and understanding of where the academic schedule was in the things that the institution needs to do to be compliant, because we're trying to avoid the issues of the 2023 season.
Yeah, I think those are pretty far behind us, but they also put us at a place where we have to be sensitive to that reality. And, not everybody may remember the importance of those kinds of things. Eligibility is a real thing.
Yes.
Getting on campus in time to be able to enroll in classes so that you can play in the spring game is a real thing. And the fact that they've announced a spring game tells me a lot about how many guys have bought into sticking around and being developed by the new coaching staff. There was a point at which the fear was that a huge number of players from the university were going to jump into the portal. And I just don't think, outside of the secondary, I just don't feel
Mhm.
like that has actually materialized. And so that's a great thing. It says that there's a message being conveyed that is resonating with the players. I think we'll also learn a lot about what they have by who they choose to go after the spring game, right? What do they look to add to the roster after the spring game will tell us a lot about kind of what they think they have and where they need to shore up. So we know offensive line and defensive line are a constant need just because the nature of the game dictates that. But it'll be interesting to see what else they do going into 2020, the start of the summer program. It reminds me of last year when we were seeing new quarterbacks show up on the roster in, June and early July. You and I were both scratching our heads going, what's going on? And that became a known challenge throughout the season. So that's it for kind of all that has gone on. Any final thoughts?
Um, Looking forward to this roster for the spring. This is an important spring game.
Yeah.
I say it in a joking manner, but this is a very important spring game. If we're being honest, it's a tone setter, obviously, but you also get to see, okay, well, if we can get some guys out of the portal, what do we need to get? As you said earlier, the line is always going to be a challenge for us if it's no more than depth.
Yeah, my final thoughts on any of that is simply, I'm a guy who likes to root for the little guy, right? So I'm curious to see one if they got or if they're going to get all the way up to the 105 number, right? The whole new changes in roster requirements and so forth. And the other thing that I'm interested to see is if they ended up taking any walk-ons. I'm curious to see if they have been able to fill out the spring game roster with, you know, young people who are already on campus, maybe played significantly in high school and kind of thought their opportunity was done. I'm curious to see if Coach Malone has utilized that as a mechanism to round out the roster for the purposes of winter workouts and the spring game. I'm curious to see if that's something that they did. Now, that does not mean that any of those individuals would be huge contributors to the program, but it's just good to see because I think it builds community as it relates to the institution when individuals are given an opportunity and never know what you might turn up as far as depth players. And
Yeah.
so that is something that is, not just us. This happens all over the place. And I'm very curious to see whether or not they actually needed to or chose to exercise a program like that. So that's my thought on it all. But in general, man, it's been great talking with you. Good to see you again and to be in these spaces with you. Lots happening. Shout out to the institution and what they're trying to do. A happy Black History Month to you, sir. So that's that. And from myself and for Adam Lee Spencer, this has been the Pirate Players Then and Now podcast. Take care.